We are live. Hello, hello, and welcome to the Literary Roadhouse Book Club. Today we're discussing The Bridegroom Was a Dog by Yoko Tawada. I'm Anais, joined by Gerald Hornsby and Colette Sartor. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi, I'm so glad, we're back here to discuss. We had been joking before that after Black Leopard, Red Wolf, like morale might have been low, but I'm glad we read this little story.
Yes.
Yes.
It was different.
Much lighter fare.
Mhm.
Quite similar in some respects. But...
You're talking about the gross out factor. So, Charles, let's start with you then. What's your overall impression?
Oh, crikey! What's my overall impression? I think most of the time I didn't really know what was going on, and I do sometimes struggle with surreal stories, and there were some gross aspects to this which I thought were unnecessary and spoilt it for me. And yes, there were some funny parts too. So I don't know how I feel about this. It was mercifully short after last month's. So I'm not a particular fan. So there's an opportunity for you to do a number on me and improve my appreciation of it.
Okay.
That's so delicately handled.
Thank you.
Colette, did you like it?
I did actually. I loved it. I actually found the grossness funny. I mean, really laugh out loud funny. I might have been just giddy from having gotten the last book out of our lives. But I really loved it. I didn't think too much. It carried me along. So it wasn't till I read it a second time, because it was so short that I wanted to make sure it was fresh in my mind. So I read it again. And that's when I started thinking, okay, and also, Anais, when you sent us the questions, I started thinking, well, I never really sat and thought about, well, what's the book actually about? Why is this story being told? But there were some issues and themes in it that I really liked too, of belonging and things like that just kind of stuck with me, even though they weren't in the forefront of my mind as I read, because I was reading for the pleasure of the surrealness of it all. It was just such an odd, strange, lovely, funny world to me. So I really enjoyed it.
It's good to hear you say that, because I think I'm definitely one of those readers that likes to find the why. I'm always looking for the why is the story being told right now. Always looking for, it's not necessarily political, but some sort of commentary somewhere. And this story really evaded that in a way that I think when I first started, I got frustrated. By the end, I was just along for the ride. I'm somewhere in between you guys in enjoyment, probably. I think the ending is what bugs me the most, because it seems so out of nowhere. But we can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I would say I definitely enjoyed it more than I didn't. I'm always looking for a why, and I don't know what the why is yet. And that might be why I'm not fully on board, is just because I don't know what it's about. But otherwise, I had a good time. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay. So one of the things, well, actually, Colette, you said on the second read through, you were thinking more about like the why. Did you get a why?
I did. And I think I did in reading it the first time. It just wasn't at the forefront of my mind. It was just one of these, I was enjoying the world. But I really, to me, it was about belonging, and maybe it's the misfit in me, but I looked at it as, you've got this odd woman who's running a cram school, which the whole concept of a cram school made me giggle. But she's running this school and she doesn't fit in, but because the children like her, the mothers find ways to justify the odd stories they hear coming from the school. And just, the way she looks at the little girl and takes her in, and, the misfit,
Mhm.
And even Taro's a misfit, and the fact that she's not attracted to him anymore once she finds out that he was just this ordinary man.
Mhm.
And yet she, when everyone leaves at the end, it actually kind of rang true. Yes, she was escaping, but so were they. It was just, to me, it was, how do people fit in? And especially because, that's something that's so valued in Japanese culture, fitting in and making sure you follow the rules and follow the cultural mores, and the fact that none of them did. And then they left. So I loved that about it.
Yeah. When you put it that way, the through line becomes a lot clearer. So that's, so thanks for putting it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's especially the themes of, the sexual themes, and it's not even sexual, it's the sexuality. It's the, couplings that are frowned upon. And yet, because of the surreal nature of the story, seem perfectly natural. And because she treats everything as just perfectly natural. She tells the story about the princess who wants to marry the dog. So yeah, it was really lovely in that way.
Yeah. Gerald, did you get any different sort of why or?
No, it made me smile when Colette call it really lovely in that way, because lovely is probably one of the last things I would ascribe to it. And I suppose I can't once again I can't get past the strange couplings and the sexuality, because I don't know, maybe I'm a prude, or maybe there's something that when I read something like this with strange sexual things going on, I sort of almost recoil from it, and I think, why is the story have to have this in it? And I think maybe I'm a bit straight-laced, because when I write, I could never write erotica because I can't do the physical actions, and everything to me, anything sexual happens behind a closed door, and the reader just guesses what goes on. So when something is laid out as I mean, in a way, I suppose I quite admire that someone can write something so naturally. It's like, this happened. Of course it did. It's there's nothing to be shocked at. But it's that I really have a problem with, and I disconnect from the story. And I think I know a bit about Japanese culture. I've been to Japan a couple of times. So yes, you're right, Colette. I agree. It's this. These are the rules. These are the customs by which Japanese people live their lives, and they've been so for centuries. And they have McDonald's on street corners and stuff, but the real culture doesn't change. It's still as sort of strict and tight as it ever was. But it's I really have a trouble with fairly graphic coupling in a strange way. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd say the story about the princess who's the dog's licking her bum clean was like gross, but I didn't necessarily recoil strongly. The one time I did recoil was when Taro first shows up and just puts himself on Mitsuko. It's not written like he forced himself, but she was completely, it was weird. It was like in this weird space between consent, not consent. And I think the story,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And the story doesn't want you to ask that question because it's not about that. It's not making a hard statement about that one way or the other, but I found it weird. That part I recoiled a bit. And also because it's describing the penis as this vegetable, which was going into the vagina. I'm just
funny.
Okay. All right. Got it.
That was odd. I agree. That was the one moment in the story where I'm like, I could let this make me dislike the story, or I could just keep going and go with it.
Yeah, exactly. You have to choose to go with it because it was a little disturbing how he just shows up, picks her up, and has his way with her, but she at no point is
She's not disturbed.
She's not disturbed. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to roll with it then. I'm going to take my cues from the protagonist and I'm going to roll with it like she is.
That's exactly what it was. I'm going to take my cues from the protagonist. That's such an excellent description of exactly what I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, Mitsuko's cool, I guess.
That's really interesting. I find that quite fascinating, actually. And I understand what you're saying about that. And I can see it's this. I think my problem is I can't split fiction from reality, and forceful, semi-non-consenting sex, to me, is wrong in any context, and that's and I have a real quite strict line. I understand and accept what you're saying, and I think you're right. I think you're right to do that, to say, okay, it's fiction, it's written in this way, it's not a social commentary, so let's not get hung up about it. But I do get hung up on it. Oh,
I think that's fair too.
That is fair. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there was all these references to Japanese culture, which we touched upon. There was a lot of little things so I took Japanese language throughout high school and college, and in college I did an Asia Studies minor. So I'm not an expert, but I've had some exposure. Like Inuma, the last name Inu is dog. What? Now I know,
okay.
little things like that. I just knew.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And cram schools are very much a thing. And also the way Ryoko is like a fox, and the fox spirit, the tricky kind of spirit, is a big part of Japanese folklore. And then the way in which there was this mixing between the old and the new, right? The north part of town has the new apartment complexes. It's where the port town is. The south has these ancient stones that date back to before World Wars, before the whole cadmium rice thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but when the rice paddies were poisoned. There's all of that. That also appears throughout the story in other places as well, right? Like when Taro gets attacked by the dogs, and I don't remember if it was his mother or Ryoko's mother, but one of the mothers goes, "Oh, an evil spirit has taken him now."
Oh, that was his grandmother. Taro's grandmother.
Yeah. So again, the old, that mixing, right? For a lot of people, it's oh, he didn't get rabies, thank God, everything's fine. She's no, an evil spirit has taken him now. I really liked that. I just liked the Japanese-ness of it.
Oh, I wish I'd had that background to know those things, because that enriches the story a lot. Because Ryoko was confusing to me. I loved her. I thought she was a fascinating character, but she confused me. Mm-hmm. Even reading her the second time, thought, what is her place in this story? Mm-hmm. Why does she suddenly appear? I mean, I know she appears because suddenly we find that he was married and he had this other life and he's gone through this transformation. But why did she go through her transformation? Where does that fit in the story? And it seems to me from the little you've described already, her fit is partially kind of a cultural and folkloric one. Mm-hmm. Not kind of, it is.
It is, yeah.
And I love that, because there is this fantasy, folklore, fairy tale quality to this story that I read. And maybe that's another reason I liked it, because to me it read like a fairy tale. Mm-hmm. Like a kind of a racy, raunchy fairy tale, but a fairy tale. And in that way, quite frankly, it felt quite Japanese to me, because there's that wonderful raunchy side of Japanese culture and Japanese humor that I've always loved, because you don't expect it.
That often involves animals, by the way.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
So
it scares me that part of Japanese culture I know, but I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that famous woodblock print of that's one of the oldest ones from the Edo period, the fisherman's wife, which is the fisherman's wife having sex with an octopus. Cool. That's a classic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And full circle, you can find that stuff on Amazon Kindle right now.
See, the old and the new. The old and the new, guys.
Yep, the old and the new.
Very good.
Yeah. But, I like what you were saying about how fitting in Japanese culture, a lot of it is about, not being different from the rest of society, from fitting in. And also, I like how in the beginning, when they were trying to establish that Mitsuko is eccentric, but not necessarily like heretical to the point of social exclusion. So
Right.
how does the author paint this? She's gross, snot, poop, right? Like that, like in this culture, if you want to establish that someone is weird, but not like cast them out weird, snot and poop is how you do it. Because like I don't think that's how necessarily a Western author would establish that, right? There would be a different thing that you would play with. But here it's like gross hygiene things.
Well, gross hygiene things, because that's fastidious orderliness of Japanese culture, where everything is done a certain way, everything's very orderly. It disturbs that part. It's also very young. It's scatological. It's childish.
Yeah,
it comes across as almost childlike humor, and she's good enough with the children that they're willing to, they're children. They exaggerate things. They don't always hear things properly. And those are also things that could be construed by parents who really want to do it as, oh, this is a child's interpretation of what she must have really said. Yeah. But you're right. That's a very different cultural way of making someone weird and different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point because one of the first words that children learn is poo, and once they understand it becomes hilarious, and they'll repeat it, and they'll talk with their friends at school and nursery about it, and everything becomes poo at one time in their life. So it's quite, you can see that she's really sort of dropping herself down to the children's level and creating that bond between her and the children.
And one of the other things that's interesting about that is when the little girls see her breasts and the parents find out about that, like none of that is alarming, which is very different from Western society.
Yes, very
different.
Oh, can you imagine?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but in this culture, like the nudity part of it isn't as big a deal. Like, you probably shouldn't be naked, but we're not going to cast you out for this like slip up, right?
Yeah.
Where like, remember what happened to Janet Jackson? Like,
oh God,
yeah, very different approach to nudity as well.
Was that a $500,000 fine?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So the story starts with Mitsuko talking about the story of the princess who was too young to wipe her own butt, had a lazy maid, so the dog cleaned her butt, and then she marries the dog. Okay, so in what ways does Mitsuko's story parallel that story, and in what ways is it different?
Yeah, it's a whole sort of having about a dog being more than a pet, more than an animal that you treat in a certain way. It's because we are all animals, and it's almost as if the author is suggesting that we are not so different from them. There is a clear distinction between us and a dog, but actually, we're all just animals. So maybe she's blurring that boundary a little bit. Maybe.
Did you get that, or did you?
Yeah, I think that's a great interpretation. I liked when you're thinking about I hadn't really thought about the I mean, I subconsciously, I guess I did think about the parallels between that princess story and what happens with Taro and Mitsuko. And there was what strikes me is you've got the real physicality of the fairy tale that carries through literally into the story. But, the fairy tale had so many different endings, which I loved, because there are so many different endings, slightly, little modifications on fairy tales that happen throughout the years. And it makes me wonder what we were supposed to take from that aspect of it, because that doesn't necessarily, you can't carry that through. I mean, you could, but it would be a very different kind of story. But with this story, there are different threads that come out unexpectedly, but it's fairly linear in the direction it takes.
Yeah. And there is the coupling between human and dog.
Yeah.
There is the butt licking, but I think it's Mrs. Orita who suggests to Mitsuko that she marry Taro to legitimize things. And
Yes.
and Mitsuko's like, well, why? Like, why does he have to divorce Ryoko and marry me? Like, she's just very much like not even in that headspace which is again kind of funny. Like, Taro's weird. He's like sitting out on a rock all day doing nothing, runs around at night, possibly gay. No one's sure. Well, he would be bisexual, I suppose. He has a friend who he plays around with, and there's all of this like winking as to like what that means. And
which I thought was so funny.
Yeah. And Mrs. Orita's first concern is legitimizing the coupling. Like, you should definitely marry this clearly like this guy who, like, if we were to forget the part that he's a dog, just look at him as a guy. His behavior is like red flags everywhere. It doesn't matter. There's
doesn't
like
matter. You still should be marrying him.
Right.
Well, and that is such a huge contrast between the princess story where the presumption is if you do this thing, your prize is to marry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to the dog, but still the prize is marriage. And that's again, and that actually is a very strong, not as much, I guess. Yeah, no, it is. If you think about it, even in our culture, very often the prize is to marry.
Yeah.
And so if you don't go that route, and I eventually did, but I married much later than most people I knew. You're an oddity.
Mm-hmm.
And Mitsuko doesn't see it that way. She's actually surprised that the issue even comes up. So that's another way of looking at this story, or another example of the story being about, people who don't fit in and are surprised when other people expect them to. Mm-hmm. Because Mitsuko is surprised. Why should I marry him?
Right.
That's not what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love. I mean, they weren't despite my sort of semi-revulsion at a lot of this book. There were some genuinely funny parts to it, and you mentioned about the sort of being gay or bisexual or something, and there's just one line I'm looking at now says about Fukiko's father swinging his hips at the game center.
Oh.
And I just love that expression. I think that's so cute. It's hilarious.
Well, it's the kids were teasing her, right? That's when the kids start teasing her, and it's such a childlike way of talking about someone who might be gay, and it's also it's that we don't know why this is funny and something to tease her about, but this is the way we'll say it.
Yes,
it is very fun. It's a funny turn of phrase.
So I'm also looking at, there's all these different funny turns of phrase, but there's also that story that Miss Arita tells about Inuma when he worked at the pharmaceutical company, and he has that phrase, I see what you mean, and he says it very sincerely. Okay, this confused me because there's a part of me that thinks, wait, this behavior is so weird. Was Inuma always a dog, or did he become a dog after the attack? Because he was weird even before the dog attack.
Weird. He was weird, but he was meek. He was also meek because remember that's what what's his wife's name again, Ryoko? That's what she doesn't like about him because he was so meek, and and she sees him changing, and the change at first makes her want him. So that's why she goes to the dojo and starts physically strengthening herself. Mm-hmm. But then as she becomes more like him, she wants him less, which I thought was fascinating. And yet that inspired her. And also there's several points where her eyes were just like Taro's. And I'm thinking, okay, she couldn't have also transformed into a dog. She didn't get bitten, but there's that fox element, correct?
Yeah, she's compared as looking like a fox.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think she's a fox lady. I think a fox lady married someone who either kind of was or became a dog man. There's a weird way in which nothing's ever really confirmed necessarily. Like, is she a fox? Is she not? They don't really answer that question. With Inuma, there's a little bit more clues for you to conclusively say he's some sort of dog man. But it's not like it's ever like, oh, he shifts into a dog while he's running around with his dog friend. No, he's always in human form. So it's just kind of weird. Like, he doesn't have a dog form.
But again, I really liked that.
I wondered whether at one point they were because he was physically very strong, and I wonder whether she was trying to imply that he became more animalistic, and then when she started working out, she became more animalistic, more basic, less nuanced, perhaps.
Maybe that's that mix of the old and new, which it's depending how you want to look at this. It can either there's some modern, maybe sort of vaguely science-based explanation, because you can also say, oh, he became less meek after his brush with death, after he survived an attack from a pack of rabid dogs and decided to take life by the horns. And like, there's always that sort of more modern thinker's explanation, or there's the spirits have come through here, right? You can kind of take it both ways. And it's not super clear which one it is, because it could just be, or because also remember the way that things are passing through has some sort of classic fantastical elements. So every single time that Mitsuko and Taro couple, he's like sucking on her neck, and it even is described as vampire-like, and she starts to gain the ability to smell things at his level when she couldn't before. She could smell her own emotions. She's getting some kind of power from this that she didn't have before.
Yeah,
there's this transference of power in a way that's like a fantastical creature. And then Ryoko does the same thing, and you could argue that the thing she gets from Yoko is not liking Taro anymore. Partially, is it because of the story, or is it because like now she's getting more fox-like and is not attracted to dogs anymore? Like,
I didn't like that.
Yeah, or is she getting this power from Yoko too? And if you believe that Taro became dog-like after the attack, werewolves bite something and then you become a werewolf, right? Then there's a way in which things are getting transferred in a very physical way that seems fantastical without anything ever being confirmed. So it's up to you to interpret.
And there's something I like about the writer leaving it up to us, just kind of leaving it more open. And again, to me, that feels like a type of storytelling that you don't see very often. And it's nice to be in that. It's okay. Here are the rules of the world. I'm going to define this. We are in the human world. No one's going to take any fantastical forms, but their behavior is going to change. And I'll leave it to you to decide why. And I actually really like that, because we're so, and it's funny, even when I teach writing, I'm always talking about, okay, you as the writer have an obligation to your readers. If you want to be read a certain way, then your job is to make sure you write the story in such a way so that you close off other interpretations other than the ones that you want, your story, other than the way you want your story to be read. And I like that this author leaves it open. And leaves it more interpretable. Now that probably means she narrows her audience, because she makes the story more difficult to read, because most of us want guidance. Let's face it, as readers, and the less guidance you give a reader, oftentimes the fewer readers you're going to capture. And yet she's a huge writer in Japan.
But also
that
narrow.
also could be a cultural thing. Yes, narrow. That's true.
In a narrow way. So like she wins all these awards, but it's by people who are like used to this level of challenge.
Right. Exactly. She's a literary writer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is quite interesting that the reader has expectations when they commence a book, when they choose something to read and they look at it and look at the blurb and the description and that sort of thing. They sort of form a picture in their head of what the book is going to be like, what it's going to be about, and they have an expectation that matches. And if they find that it doesn't match, then they will, likely not like it or put it to one side. But this is a different way of doing something, of just twisting things, making things different, and then just leaving it. She doesn't close off those sort of cul-de-sacs where a reader might take something the wrong way. Those aren't closed off. They are left open, so you can interpret it just how you like, which is, yes, you have to work harder, and you can't be grounded in your expectations, because it could totally change. And that's a really interesting and quite brave thing to do, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very brave thing to do as a writer.
When I was looking up other people's interpretations, like a little bit of research after reading it, I was telling Gerald this. There wasn't much. It was really hard to find anyone who's like, this is what the story is about. This is my interpretation. This is what this symbol means, da 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 da, and that symbol means da da da. Everything was just like fairy tale-esque, dreamy prose, like, and then, but nothing about like why you actually like something. Or there was a lot of people who said they didn't like it because they found it a bit, difficult to latch onto. To your point, Colette, which is like, if you don't give people a lot of guidance and you're bringing in all the scatology things, you're significantly narrowing your audience. But even the audience that liked it couldn't really, in a convincing way, write why. Like I maybe I didn't, might not have dug deep enough, but from the ones that I found, there wasn't enough of like a why they liked it. It was just I did, which tends to be a little bit what's happening here on this show as well, right? Like Colette, on your first read through, you knew you liked it without having yet done the exercise.
Really thought about, yeah.
It's interesting. But you know how the why was missing for me with the thought that it's about belonging all of a sudden, because the ending had frustrated me a little bit. Now it sort of makes a bit more sense. Like I understood why Mitsuko was taking an interest in Fukiko, the bullied chubby girl who didn't have any friends, but then she just like takes her, and it just ends with her running away with Fukiko, which I found out of nowhere. Really, it seemed very
well. You know what I wanted to ask you guys about in terms of the ending, and also in terms of one of the things that I was thinking about this morning after I read it again, and I was walking my dog. Ironically enough, the telegrams, when Taro first shows up, did you get my telegram? Did you get my telegram? And then Ryoko, did you get my telegram? And at the end, the only people who get the telegram are the Aritas from Mitsuko, who sends a telegram saying, I've run off with Fukiko. And I thought, well, what is that? That's got to mean something. 3 different times in the book, we hear about telegrams. And it's only when Mitsuko runs off with the child and Taro and Fukiko's father leave together and they're happy. They're standing close together. They're touching. They're unashamed. They're unabashed. That's only then does someone actually receive a telegram. And I thought it was significant, but I didn't know why. And I wondered if you guys had any thoughts about it, because I was really curious about that. It felt like it was, especially because that's the note she ended the book on. Like, well, what does that mean?
The thing that made it weirdest for me is it's very clear that that phrase, like, did you get my telegram? The first time when Taro says it, I don't think there ever was a telegram.
Exactly.
She doesn't know him.
Yeah.
They've never met before. They don't have a previous relationship. It's random.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt.
Yeah. There was no telegram.
I'm looking for meaning. It's the same thing with Ryoko. Why? But now Ryoko's asking it. So I'm thinking, oh, is it something between Taro and Ryoko? Does it have something to do with their relationship? And I've given no guidance. So I'm just like, okay. But then at the end, for that third time, for there to actually be a telegram, it made me feel like, okay, the author's there's got to be some meaning in it, but I just didn't know what it was.
And I mean, even why did Taro pick Mitsuko anyway? I don't know.
Yeah. How did he find his way there?
Yeah.
Well, she was.
Sorry. I wonder whether it's the author saying something like this is the author through the device of a telegram, sort of rounding off. So the earlier parts where the telegram is mentioned, the recipient doesn't get the telegram. Maybe the recipient is meant to be the reader, so that, but because we're not telegrammed, we've not been told what's going on, and we have to, like the other people in the story, they're just dealing with things as they happen, and we are dealing with things as they happen. Perhaps at the final time, when the readers get a telegram, it's telling us what's happened. I don't know.
I like that. That's
a
interesting.
meta telegram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was
If I were trying to find a story behind the story, the reason Taro found Mitsuko is because he was already friends with Fukiko's dad. Fukiko repeated the story of the princess with the dog. Like, I was trying to find like some way that Taro latched on, but it makes no sense if he already has this like relationship with Fukiko's dad. Like, I don't get it. It's all very confusing.
And then remember when Mitsuko asks Fukiko, what does your father think of Taro? And Fukiko says, why would he think anything of Taro? Because Fukiko's never seen them together. And yet Fukiko always seems so careful to leave before Taro comes home. And again, I was looking to make some meaning out of that and form some connectivity between, like you said, figure out how he got there in the first place. And there's not enough connective tissue there for me to make anything of it.
Mm-hmm. And if you're gonna go with the fantasy thing, she opened herself up to mystery man dog coupling by propagating the story. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like the spirit. Like, she's just weird enough and open enough to this that it happens to her.
That honestly, that I think is what I went with.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you don't have that kind of, when the writer doesn't explicitly give you guidance about how to read something, you make assumptions. And so I think that's the assumption. I think that was a logical assumption to make. And we want to fill in blanks for ourselves. That's who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like how Taro is like cooking and cleaning. Like,
I love that.
Yeah, it was funny. It was just
because that's a bit strange, because if he's being portrayed as a sort of man dog thing,
he's a working dog.
Mm-hmm.
He's a working dog. I have a German Shepherd who is a working dog. If he is not working, he is being very annoying. So Taro put himself to work. I don't know. I'm just spitballing.
Yeah. And also in the story, the dog is all about cleanliness when he's licking the princess's butt. So,
and also Taro in his earlier life was fastidious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the man wiping the worm from his shoe.
Mm-hmm. Who wouldn't share pencils at work because that woman would chew on pencils.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. It's really interesting to discuss this and hear the ideas that are being put forward, because you can see they sort of resonate, and it's almost like there's a little bit of a thread, and then you pick that up and it goes nowhere. It's a little bit of a thread. It's like you're right on the verge of understanding the story, but actually not.
It makes me curious to read more of her work, and to read more Japanese literature in general, to see if that would help me better understand this particular mode of storytelling. Because I feel like part of what I'm missing maybe in my lack of understanding of this type of this genre of literature, of Japanese literature. There's something I'm missing. You know, that would help. It would help if I read more of her work.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to read more of her work as well. And it's funny because some of the things were like, oh, it's Murakami-esque. It's not Murakami-esque. I've read a lot of Murakami. No. Just because there's some magical realism.
It doesn't.
That's the overlap. End of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, let's dwell on the ending a little bit more, because why does Mitsuko leave and why does she take Fukiko? And again, there may not be an answer, as so many things with the story, but
I mean, clearly they were developing a bond. I thought it was so interesting that it wasn't this pure loving bond, that it was tinged with anger and frustration, because that made it feel more real. I actually wondered the same thing. I wasn't sure. And yet it made sense to me that she would leave with Fukiko, that if she were going to leave, she was not going to leave that child.
Mm-hmm. It's just very strange. That child has a dad, but the dad's also a dog man, so maybe it doesn't
And the
matter.
dad's leaving. The dad is leaving without his child.
Yeah.
You know? And so it kind of made me wonder, without the way that the note is phrased in such a way that it sounds like Mitsuko's running away with the child.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't interpret it as, well, she thinks the child's going to be alone, so she's just taking the child with her. No, it kind of seems like she took the child first.
Yes, she's kidnapping a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it made it harder to understand that ending.
Yeah.
She actually uses the words "have escaped" with Fukiko.
Yeah.
Which is quite a strong. It's because the rest of the translation is really good and I think spot on. So the word "escaped"
That might be a very, very particular translation as well. Yeah.
Yeah, for a reason.
Maybe it's back to that through line of belonging. Here's a society that keeps trying to make them fit, and they don't want to fit.
Yeah, that I think is a good way to look at it, because Mitsuko's done fitting in. I mean, she's taught this cram school, and she's done it for she had gotten the lease for 10 years, but she hadn't been there. She'd been there, what, 3 years? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But she'd been there a certain amount of time, and suddenly her world changes. You know, the things that she's open to, the scatological things she's open to, suddenly become real. And this child comes to her school who doesn't fit in either.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got Mrs. Orita telling her, well, you should marry him. Well, why would I do that? So yeah, maybe it's just at her time of, you know, no, I'm not going to fit in, you know, and I don't need to try anymore. Time to go.
Mm-hmm.
But it defies categorization, this ending, and it's frustrating.
Mm. And you know, Mitsuko and Fukiko don't even necessarily fit well together, because Fukiko shows up every day, but she like resents the way that Mitsuko's like trying to force him, or like, right? Like Fukiko's like resentful even as she shows up every day.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm just not as smart as you are.
Yeah.
You know, and Mitsuko gets frustrated with her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's not, you're right. It's not like it's this loving, you know, mother-daughter, you know, we're filling in for each other relationship, but they leave together.
Because I guess they just understand each other's needs to be different and not bothered by the expectations of society.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, because if you think about it, Fukiko never seems to care all that much that the other girls don't talk to her and that people are mean to her.
And she's never described as sad, really. I can't remember.
No, I don't think she was. She wasn't. She's described as disinterested. It's funny, she's almost dog-like in her own way, because even though dogs are social, there are dogs who are just like not interested, you know, and you know, she wasn't interested in reading. She was interested in being close, but she wasn't interested in reading. She was, you know, simple. Her needs were much simpler than little girls her age. It was interesting. But that was definitely a frustrating storyline for me, because it
seemed sudden.
It seemed sudden. It was hard to figure out what I was supposed to take from it. You know, what's the shift? What's the change? Oh, there was a shift and a change, but the why of it was hard to fathom. Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift over to the prose. So we're reading a translation, but Gerald was talking about how the translation seemed very good. What did you guys think of the prose?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's strange that someone complained about the long sentences, because it seemed, they never seem to be a problem in reading them. It's not like you're sort of struggling to hold your attention during these long sentences. They're constructed really well. They've just got lots of words in them. So I think I don't understand the complaint, but but at no time did I realize that I was reading a translation, which is normally you get a feeling that there's sometimes a little bit awkward where words don't seem to be quite the right ones, or the construction's a little bit off. But it seems like this was translated and possibly rewritten so that it made more sense to an English reader. Made more sense. To an English reader, perhaps.
I really enjoyed the prose. I was surprised. It was funny because when I think before we started reading, we were talking about how, readers had found this one more difficult. And so I was expecting dense prose and, heavy, dense. And so I was so delighted that it was actually, the prose felt light and lively and specific. And so it sang along for me. And while I noticed that the sentences were long, I agree with Gerald. I didn't have a problem following them at all. Sometimes with, when you get long sentences, the density and the word choices and the complex sentence structures get confusing and wear on you. And I didn't feel that way at all. I found the language playful. And the imagery was playful and vivid. And yeah, I loved it. I mean, I really enjoyed the prose. That was not something that held me back.
Yeah. I think light is a good way to put it too. It never felt like something that I had to sort of slog through to understand. And that actually has very little to do with sentence length. Well, I shouldn't say very little. A longer sentence, there's a higher risk of a weird syntax happening. But, last month's book, Black Leopard, Red Wolf, was short sentences, and it still felt dense. It still felt penetrable.
Yeah, I agree.
Despite having long sentences. It was very airy is another good way to put it, but still vivid in the sense that she was painting a picture in my mind at all times. I'm picturing everything. I'm seeing the veranda. I'm seeing the rooms. I'm seeing, the classes, the town, the layout, which is great. I love that. I love when it's happened to me a few times, and only time will tell if it's going to happen to me with this one, where I'll think back on something that I read and I thought it was a movie. That's how you know an author did a great job of painting something. I'm trying to think of, there was this Indian author who did a book that I read. Man, I gotta find it. I know I can find it, but it's a story that it was so vividly drawn that I completely thought it was a movie. And I was trying to, one day I was trying to Google the name of the movie, and there was no movie. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, no, I can't find it.
I can see how that happens because.
Sorry, Sleeping on Jupiter by Anurag Roy, if anyone's wondering.
Ooh.
That's what it was.
Okay.
I like that title.
Yeah. It's super vivid. Rough in places. Like a lot of abuse, but yeah. Not Black Leopard levels, but yeah.
There's very, very little that's Black Leopard abuse level.
Yeah. And a lot of non-abusive passage. There's just like one setting where things happen. Yeah. Anyway, you were going to say, Joe, before I cut you off.
It is interesting, and sometimes the medium by which a story is told is quite sort of flexible, so that when you read stories and when you watch stories on TV, the story comes across, and when the story has meaning and you understand it and you look into it, that I can totally understand that it's just a story, and there are pictures that you associate with the written word, especially when it's done vividly and starkly. And I can't think of any at the moment, but I know, like you, there are certain novels that I've read that I am certain are films because I've seen the pictures. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, the visual imagery is so finely drawn with words. Yeah, and that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Without it being super expositional and say, sky was this and the was this, and it's to be able to get those pictures across without just dumping exposition on the reader.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. Sorry, I was just checking the thing. Okay, so anything else you wanted to add about this story?
I don't think so. I think we've covered it. You know, I'm impressed at how much we've managed to get out of it, given how little guidance she did give the readers.
Mhm.
You know, she doesn't,
It's not much longer than a short story. And I don't know how many words it is, but it's certainly a fairly quick read.
yes.
And I thank you too, because I am less reviled by it now, and able to look at it more as a work of fiction rather than something that turns my stomach. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. But I'll admit, before this discussion, I was a little nervous entering it, not because of the scatology, but because I didn't know how to start talking about it, because she gives such little guidance. I'm like, I don't really know what the entry point is for discussion, which is why I started with, what is the story about? The hard question. Let's just get there.
I thought that was the smartest way to start this discussion, because it was the thing that I was wondering about.
Mhm.
Like when I really was thinking about, well, how are we going to talk about this story today? Like, what's the story about anyway?
Yeah.
Like, what are and usually I don't really think about that, because usually the thematic aspects are so interconnected to the plot
Mhm.
and to the characters as they form and the things they want. And those are all hidden here.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, they're not explored. They're left for us to intuit.
Yeah. Oh, and something actually that Colette, you said before the pre-show. So this happens a lot, listeners, where we'll start talking before we start recording, and then we go, wait, we should say this on air. This is good stuff. So Colette, you had made the observation that a lot of the story, especially the beginning, was set up through gossip, which reminded you of Milkmen by Anna
Yes.
Burns. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, I loved that, because first of all, I find gossip fascinating. And it's such a great way to set up a cultural structure. And it really did immediately set the tone and the world for me. I immediately knew this world. And part of it is, you know, when you've had a kid who goes through school, you immediately recognize that the social hierarchy or the gossip structure of talking about your kids' teachers and what goes on at school, and your concerns about how they're being taught, and the sanctimony that often goes on in those circles. So it immediately set up that world for me, but it also very specifically set up this cultural world, you know, the way things are, like you said, the way things are spoken about differently, the things that matter most to these parents and given this culture, and the contrast between what we know would matter to us in our own culture. So that was a really fast, and the same in Milkman. The way that gossip structure worked was so reflective of the issues going on in the country, the political issues going on in the country, the expectations that people put on each other, given the context of the religious and socio-political context in which they were all raised. So it's a really fascinating way to establish a world.
And something else that I don't think we've mentioned is the way she tells parts of the story from the point of view of the children, and how she expresses the children's behavior and reactions are really very, very good. And you can totally see the children reacting like this, and you know, sneaking in through the hole in the fence, and
Yes.
and that, I think that she's very, very clever to get that absolutely spot on to me.
Yeah, when the girls see her breasts, and then the boys like hear the shrieking of the girls, so they come in, but then they see the breasts, and they're like, normally they would like delight in making the girl shrieks, but under these very specific conditions, they turn tail and run. That's great.
That was great.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we have discussed this. I love this discussion. I feel like I learned so much more about the story.
I did too. That was
Yeah,
really
me too.
fun.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Okay, so Hopefully we can have this richer discussion next month, because next month we're reading Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Sadawi. As you read the book, let us know your thoughts on Twitter with the hashtag LRH Book Club, or join our discussion group on Facebook, the Louis Roadhouse Readers. There's a link in the show notes. And please leave an iTunes review, or Stitcher or Spreaker, but iTunes is like the Mac Daddy of review clout. It helps a lot. Support our podcast expenses at patreon.com/the Roadhouse. Every bit helps. Thanks you guys for this great discussion.
Thank you too. Very good. Really enjoyed it.
That was really fun, you guys.
It was great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right.